Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, January 16th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Hamas and Israel reach a Gaza ceasefire deal. So very big and exciting news here. After over 15 months of Israel's U.S.-backed genocidal war on Gaza, Israel and Hamas have reached a hostage and ceasefire deal, an agreement that was first announced by President-elect Donald Trump. So Hamas confirmed on Wednesday that it approved the deal, and Israeli officials have told the media that an agreement was reached. Though it still needs to be formally approved by the Israeli government, which is expected to happen on Thursday. So the U.S. and Qatar announced that there was a deal. Biden came out with a statement. He gave a brief address about it, and this was after Trump tweeted about it, or he posted on Truth Social about it. But then a few hours after that, Netanyahu came out and claimed that an agreement still hasn't been reached and that the details will be finalized tonight. He said this on Wednesday night. So, but all signs are pointing to the Israeli government is going to approve it. That's what all the Israeli media reports say. And according to a source speaking to NBC News, once Israel's government approves the deal, Israel's Supreme Court would then have 24 hours to appeal the decision. And then Qatar's Prime Minister, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, he said that the ceasefire will take effect on Sunday, January 19th. So this Sunday is when it's actually going to take effect. Israel is still bombing Gaza. It looks like they've actually ramped things up. But you see here this picture of Palestinians celebrating in the streets of Gaza. Huge celebrations. The people living under this siege, under this bombing campaign, are very excited about the relief that they will get under this deal. Now, there's a lot of details that still need to be worked out. Essentially, Israel has not committed to a permanent ceasefire. But again, it looks like these people are finally going to get some relief. So it's certainly a reason to celebrate. But now to get into some of the details here. So the deal involves 3 phases meant to lead to a permanent end to the conflict and the reconstruction of Gaza. However, details of the second and third phases still need to be negotiated, and Israel could potentially restart military operations after the first phase. And the first phase involves a 42-day ceasefire during which Hamas will release 33 Israeli hostages. In exchange, Israel is expected to release hundreds or possibly thousands of Palestinian prisoners, and Israeli troops will withdraw within 1 kilometer of the Gaza border, an area where the IDF has destroyed every building to create this so-called buffer zone. Aid will be surged into Gaza with 600 trucks expected to enter the strip per day. So this is what Trump wrote on Truth Social, just like as these reports came out saying that a deal was reached. He said, and this is in all caps, so I'm not really going to capture his energy here, but he said, quote, "We have a deal for the hostages in the Middle East. They will be released shortly. Thank you," end quote. And then in another post, Trump wrote, quote, "This epic ceasefire agreement could have only happened as a result of our historic victory in November, as it signaled to the entire world that my administration would seek peace and negotiate deals to ensure the safety of all Americans and our allies. With this deal in place, my national security team, through the efforts of Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, will continue to work closely with Israel and our allies to make sure Gaza never again becomes a terrorist safe haven," end quote. So according to Israeli media, and we'll get more into this in another story, it's the pressure that Witkoff put on Netanyahu is what made this happen. The Biden administration refused to put any sort of pressure on Netanyahu. And again, we'll get much more into that in another story. So Palestinians in Gaza are celebrating the news. I put a quote in here from Abu Bakr Abed. He's a journalist in Gaza. He said, quote, "The happiness is literally eternal. Gaza's streets are erupting. The tears of everyone, the joy. I lost the words, end quote. And unfortunately, again, the attacks continued, but big celebrations in Gaza. And let's, hope this thing gets implemented on Sunday and that there is peace and that there is a big aid effort to bring these people some relief. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills dozens of Palestinians in Gaza after news of the ceasefire deal. So Israeli strikes killed dozens of Palestinians in Gaza on Wednesday after the news that Israel and Hamas had reached a ceasefire deal, which again still needs final approval by the Israeli government and is expected to take effect on Sunday. Medical sources told Al Jazeera that at least 82 Palestinians were killed by Israeli attacks on Wednesday, including about 30 who were killed after the ceasefire deal was announced. You see this picture here of a wounded Palestinian boy being taken into the hospital. Most of the dead were killed by Israeli strikes on Gaza City, but Israeli attacks were also reported in the southern city of Khan Yunis and central Gaza. According to the Quds news network, 20 Palestinians were killed by an Israeli bombing of a residential building in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood of Gaza City. Hossam Shabbat, he's a journalist in Gaza, wrote on X, quote, "The occupation army is going crazy. The bombing has not stopped. We are now living through difficult moments under a barrage of attacks," end quote. And I can't imagine how that must affect your just mental state if, you have this great news that there's going to be a ceasefire, everybody's celebrating, yet the bombing doesn't stop. If anything, it intensifies, and you're just trying to hold on and survive until Sunday in hopes that there's going to be a deal, that there's going to be a ceasefire. So, again, man, there's reasons to be pessimistic, I guess, because of it seems like Israel, based on what we've seen a lot of officials say, and we'll get more into this in another story, that they're just committing to this first phase, the 42-day ceasefire, with plans to restart after that. But I think it will be really hard for them to restart once there's this calm. And I saw the statements from the Houthis, from Houthi officials on Wednesday, and it sounded like, I'm gonna write a story on it tomorrow, but it sounded like they're saying that if the ceasefire is upheld, then they're gonna stop their attacks on Israel. So it's gonna bring calm to the region, and I think it'll be difficult for Israel to restart everything if there is a real calm, especially if they actually pull out of Lebanon too. But we'll see. I'm skeptical that that's going to happen. All right, so the next one here, Israel Smotrich wants Gaza war to resume at full scale. So on Wednesday, Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich slammed the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal and said his religious Zionism party would quit the coalition government unless they were sure Israel's genocidal war would resume at full force. Smotrich wrote on X, quote, "A clear condition for our remaining in the government is the absolute certainty of returning to war with great force on a full scale and in a new configuration until complete victory over all its components, foremost among the destruction of the Hamas terrorist organization and the return of all the hostages to their homes," end quote. According to Al Mayadeen, Israeli media reported that Smotrich had given conditions to Netanyahu for staying in the government, which included a guarantee that military operations would resume after the first phase of the truce deal, which involves a 42-day ceasefire. The document Smotrich submitted to Netanyahu called for, quote, "increased military force in the next phase of fighting, utilizing additional means, and significantly reducing humanitarian aid to Gaza," end quote. So he doesn't just want to guarantee that they're going to resume military operations after the first phase. He wants a guarantee that they're going to intensify them and cut off aid. So Smotrich wrote on X, quote, "In the last 2 days, the Prime Minister and I have been holding feverish conversations on the matter. He knows the detailed demands of religious Zionism, and the ball is in his hands," end quote. So as we know, we talked about yesterday, I believe I'm trying to think of these numbers here, that Netanyahu's coalition government has 68 seats in the Knesset, which it's a 120-seat parliament. And the Religious Zionism Party has 7 seats. So that means if Smotrich and Religious Zionism quit, Netanyahu would still have a majority in the Knesset. But Ben-Gvir, the leader of the Jewish Power Party, he was calling, it sounds like he's ready to quit as well. So if both parties quit, then Netanyahu's government would lose the majority, which could lead to elections. But the opposition under Yair Lapid, the former prime minister, they're saying they're ready to help Netanyahu stay in power for this deal. But, who knows if Netanyahu trusts that that's going to be a lasting agreement. So there's a chance that this pressure from Smotrich and Ben-Gvir Netanyahu could cave to this pressure. So it's definitely a big factor in how things are going to shape up. All right, so the next one here, Trump envoy did more to sway Israel than Biden. So this is really something. This is a report based on a report from the Times of Israel, and it quoted two Arab officials who said that President-elect Donald Trump's incoming Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, did more to pressure Israel to agree to a hostage and ceasefire deal in one meeting with Netanyahu than President Biden did in an entire year. Witkoff met with Netanyahu in Jerusalem on Saturday and got him to make concessions, which Israeli media said was the deciding factor that led to the ceasefire deal announced on Wednesday. I mean, let's just say that again. This guy Witkoff, one meeting with Netanyahu, did more than Biden did over an entire year, than Biden and his whole team, Blinken, Sullivan, all these people. They did nothing. They wanted this to go on. They wanted to keep giving Israel all these weapons and bombs so they could bomb Gaza. And so it's unclear what Witkoff did, if he threatened Netanyahu with anything, if he gave him any deals. I know there was a report in Hebrew language media saying that he gave him some kind of guarantees about the West Bank. And I'm sure that is part of this, because we know this incoming Trump administration is full of people who, will support the Israeli annexation of the West Bank. He might have also given him some kind of guarantee that, you can resume military operations after the first phase. We don't really know exactly what it is, but again, it just really goes to show how pathetic the Biden administration is. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say pathetic, because it's not like they're weak or deferential. They wanted this to go on. All that rhetoric that they care about the Palestinian civilians, that they care about, it's just all total nonsense. They wanted this thing to continue. They wanted to support this slaughter in Gaza. So even though Witkoff played this crucial role in the deal, Biden took credit for the agreement. He said in a statement on Wednesday, quote, "My diplomacy never ceased in their efforts to get this done," end quote. And I think that was a typo, but that was in the statement from the White House. I think he meant to say, "My diplomats never ceased in their efforts to get this done." In brief remarks at the White House, Biden credited his foreign policy team, who he referred to as peacemakers. Imagine referring to Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan as peacemakers. So he was asked by a reporter if Trump should get credit for the deal, and he asked, "Is that a joke?" And Biden also credited his strong backing of Israel as a factor that led to the deal, but unconditional U.S. support for Israel emboldened Netanyahu to sabotage previous negotiations and escalate elsewhere in the region. So, again, Biden just don't let him take credit for this. This is not his doing. All right, so the next one here, Gaza genocide, top reason Biden voters did not support Harris. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So a new poll shows that the Israeli onslaught in Gaza was the top reason that Americans who turned out for Joe Biden in 2020 did not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024. The poll, conducted by YouGov and the Institute for Middle East Understanding Policy Project, found what few in the Democratic Party have been willing to admit, that Vice President Harris lost votes because of the Biden administration's support for Israel's genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. A press release explains, quote, 29% of voters nationally who voted for Biden in 2020 and did not vote for Kamala Harris in 2024 say that ending Israel's violence in Gaza was the top issue affecting their vote choice. The economy ranked second at 24%. I mean, these are pretty damning numbers here. And this was an issue so many Harris and Biden supporters, brushed off. And also another thing, I saw this from a lot of people on social media saying, oh, I bet you're going to be happy when Trump comes in and they, nuke Gaza, or just saying, oh, you'll see Trump is going to be so much worse than Biden. Well, so far, he's been much better than Biden, and he's not even the president yet. And again, I'm not under any illusions about Trump and his history for supporting Israel and the people that he's put in this administration. But still, the fact that it looks like there's going to be at least some kind of ceasefire is much better than what Biden has done over the past year. So, this just goes to show that this was a big factor, as much as the Democrats wanted to downplay this on the impact that this had on the election. This goes to show it's a pretty big deal. All right, so the next one here, hostage deal is not what Netanyahu is selling his supporters. So this article is from Haaretz, and it is kind of about what Netanyahu is, how he's spinning this hostage and ceasefire deal to his supporters. So there are two versions of the ceasefire and hostage release deal that Israel and Hamas have just agreed to. One version is the official document, which is almost identical to leaked drafts from previous rounds of negotiations. The second version is the deal as described by the office of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his loyalists in the Israeli and U.S. media. The gaps between these two versions represent an attempt by Netanyahu to erase a disturbing truth about this deal, that it could have been reached months ago when some hostages who were killed or murdered over the summer were still alive. But it also tells us something worse, that even after the ceasefire deal comes into effect, Netanyahu could try to sabotage its second phase to renew the war. The text of the deal draws a clear path to ending the war in return for the release of all hostages. At first, a group of 34 hostages, the majority of them alive, will be released over the course of 42 days, during which Israel will withdraw from most of Gaza, leaving some forces within a defined perimeter zone at the eastern edge. Then the second phase of the deal is supposed to start, during which Israel will release the remaining living hostages, mostly men under age 50, in return for a completion of its withdrawal from Gaza. Last but not least, there will be an exchange of dead bodies between Israel and Hamas that will mark the final and official end of the war. But a different version of the deal appears in statements and briefings published by Netanyahu's office and his media loyalists. In this version, phase 2 of the deal is a dead letter, and Israel is hell-bent on renewing the war after the completion of phase 1, even at the cost of sacrificing its male hostages. Don't take my word for it. Trust Netanyahu's own aides and confidants like his chief of staff, Yossi Fuchs, who wrote on Wednesday that the deal includes the option to resume the fighting at the end of phase 1 if the negotiations over phase 2 don't develop in a manner that promises the fulfillment of the war's goals, military and civil annihilation of Hamas and a release of hostages. And I have a strong hunch that this is something Witkoff told Netanyahu to get him to agree. Read these lines again and ask yourself, how can phase 2 of the deal, during which Israel is supposed to completely withdraw from Gaza, lead to the military annihilation of Hamas? Obviously, it can't, and Netanyahu's top aide is basically saying that if this is the result, the war will be renewed. So just something to keep in mind as this, hopefully this deal starts to be implemented on Sunday. All right, so the next one here, Israel launches first attack on HTS in Syria. This one is from Jason Ditz. So concerns about Israel's newfound hostility towards Syria's new Islamist government run by al-Qaeda-linked Hayat Tahrir al-Sham grew substantially after an Israeli drone attacked a military convoy belonging to the new government in the southern Quneitra governorate. 3 people were killed, 2 soldiers and a civilian. So this, as far as we know, is the first direct Israeli attack on HTS. They have been really bombing Syria since the regime change. And as Jason gets into in this article, you have Israel celebrating the regime change, taking credit for it, but also saying that this new regime is this big threat enough that they have to invade southern Syria. And there's this map here showing the territory that they've taken in southern Syria, and they're planning this long-term occupation So even though they're happy about the regime change, they're still bombing Syria and actually taking more territory. All right, so the next one here, Erdogan threatens invasion of Syria if HTS doesn't eliminate a SDF. So this is another one from Jason. So heavy fighting continues to rage in northern Syria as Turkish-backed Syrian National Army fighters continue to try to attack the Kurdish SDF in areas around the Tishreen Dam. At least 18 fighters, 13 SNA, and 5 SDF were reported killed. So Erdogan has been pushing the SNA-led offensive for weeks and demanded that the new Islamist Syrian government do more to eliminate the SDF entirely. Erdogan said Turkey has the power to eliminate both the SDF and ISIS themselves, and if the government doesn't take care of the SDF, they're going to launch a cross-border operation. We've seen a lot of threats from Turkish officials about this, now one directly from Erdogan here. So you could see this map from South Front, a bit of the military situation. Again, this is northern Syria where most of this fighting is happening. A lot of it along the Euphrates River. And it's been pretty heavy fighting. I mean, and it's kept up. And you could also see on this map, if you're watching the video, you probably can't really see, but if you see little American flags, this is where all the American bases are in the region, and the SDF is the U.S.-backed force. And it's just a whole mess of a situation. Something the U.S. should not be involved in, if you ask me. All right, so the next one here. Trump team says Ukraine peace will take months. So advisors to President-elect Donald Trump have conceded that a deal to end the war in Ukraine will likely take months or potentially even longer. This was reported by Reuters on Wednesday. 2 unnamed Trump associates who spoke with Reuters described Trump's promise to end the conflict within 24 hours as campaign bluster and a lack of understanding about the war. Keith Kellogg, Trump's incoming envoy to the conflict, has said that he hopes to have a deal within the first 100 days of the administration. And then we've seen Mike Waltz, the national security advisor, who's coming in. He's saying they're going to ask Ukraine to lower the conscription age from 25 to 18 to stabilize the battlefield. And, that's not just something that could happen quickly. That's a sign that they're planning to continue supporting this war so they can get leverage for peace talks. But if you look at the situation, there's not any way forward to give Ukraine really any significant leverage over Russia. Time is on Russia's side. So now we have these officials saying it's going to take months or potentially longer to reach a deal. So not a good sign on the Ukraine front. Trump has surprised me with this whole Gaza thing. The Ukraine war was one potential bright spot for his administration. Now it's not looking so good. But then on the other hand, the situation in Gaza is starting to look much better. Not exactly what we expected, but we'll see what happens. All right, so the next one here. Trump officials name China as the biggest threat facing the U.S. So during the Senate confirmation hearings this week, I haven't really covered this. Normally this is something I would cover a lot because there's a lot of foreign policy, but there's just been so much going on with this Gaza stuff. But one thing I wanted to highlight, the common thread that we've seen through the first Trump administration, through the Biden administration, and now in this next Trump administration, the common thread is that they all say China is the biggest threat facing the United States. It's going to be this existential battle between the U.S. and China this century. And this involves a big military buildup in Asia, all this new military aid for Taiwan, support for the Philippines, things that can lead to a real war. And I know all of our attention right now is on the Middle East and Ukraine for very good reason, but this is a conflict that's brewing, and it's still headed in this very dangerous direction. And, you look at this new Trump administration, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, he is a huge, huge, huge China hawk, and he made that clear during his Senate hearings. He said, quote, "The Communist Party of China is the most potent and dangerous near-peer adversary this nation has ever confronted. They have elements that the Soviet Union never possessed. They are a technological adversary and competitor, an industrial competitor, an economic competitor, a geopolitical competitor, a scientific competitor, now in every realm," end quote. So you had Rubio, saying all that, and then John Ratcliffe, who will be the head of the CIA, said similar things. He called China a once-in-a-generation challenge. And when he was the director of national intelligence under Trump, he came out and said, China's the biggest threat we've ever faced as a nation. And he talks about how some of the ways he increased the focus on China when he was in that position. And he said he's going to continue the good work of William Burns, the current CIA director, who he started this new mission center within the CIA in 2021. And then we also had Pete Hegseth, the Fox News host who Trump nominated to be the defense secretary. His hearing was mostly focused on his personal life and his past, which I haven't really paid much attention to. But he did say a few things about China. He claimed that the Biden administration has not followed the 2017 National Defense Strategy, which called for the U.S. to pivot more toward the Asia Pacific. But the Biden administration has very much done that. They have signed all these deals, and they're in the process of increasing the U.S. military presence in the Philippines, in these Pacific Island nations, in Australia, in Japan, and they've increased all these alliances. They've actually done quite a bit. And this is something we'll see the Trump administration continue. And just not good, especially when we talk about Taiwan. Again, that's kind of the biggest risk of provoking China. And this is something all these guys are going to be in favor of. All right, so the next one here, Israeli airstrike on home kills 6 in Jenin. So this basically happened as soon as there was, maybe I just saw the news at the same time, but I saw the news of a ceasefire deal in Gaza, and then there was a big Israeli airstrike in the West Bank. So this article is from the Middle East Eye. An Israeli airstrike on a home in Jenin in the occupied West Bank has killed 6 and left others wounded. And one of the victims was a 15-year-old. Others wounded during the strike are reportedly in stable condition. Eyewitnesses reported that an Israeli drone fired 3 missiles near Al-Adha roundabout in the Jenin refugee camp, according to the official Palestinian news agency Wafa. A statement by the Israeli army confirmed that an Air Force aircraft attacked a short time ago in the Jenin area. A statement issued by the Palestinian Security Forces official spokesman raised concern over what he labeled a crime committed by the Israeli army. And this is the PA, which is conducting raids in Jenin against the resistance fighters. So I think there's a chance that we could see, if this ceasefire does start in Gaza, we might see Israel ramp up in the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, Iran denies any role in Trump assassination attempts. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The Iranian president denied the Islamic Republic has ever attempted to take the life of incoming President Donald Trump. The FBI charged a man for allegedly playing a role in an Iranian plot to murder the former and future president. But if you look at that case, it's just totally bogus. It's based on something a known liar has said. There was a good Ken Silva had a good write-up about it at the Libertarian Institute that we went over. So Masoud Pezeshkian, the Iranian president, said, quote, "We have never attempted the assassination bid on Trump to begin with, and we never will," end quote. So, you see this narrative push that Iran wants to kill Trump when there were 2 assassination attempts, and neither of these guys were linked to Iran in any way. So it's very clearly a narrative that they're trying to push to, I think whip up this frenzy about Iran. And, this is something, this incoming administration, a lot of signs that they're going to be very hawkish on Iran. And this is part of it, this whole narrative. All right, so the last story here, Trump considers executive order hoping to save TikTok. So this article is from the Washington Post. So President-elect Donald Trump is considering an executive order once in office that would suspend the enforcement of the TikTok ban or sale law for 60 to 90 days, buying the administration time to negotiate a sale or alternative solution. A legally questionable effort to win a brief reprieve for the Chinese-owned app, now scheduled to be banned on Sunday nationwide. Somehow the Washington Post makes this sound like a bad thing that Trump's considering doing here, saying it's a legally questionable effort I would say the whole ban on TikTok is legally questionable. The fact that the federal government can shut down such a big platform is a very dangerous precedent, and it's very bad. And I don't think I talked about it on the show, really, but it does look like the Supreme Court is not going to block the ban. It's set to take effect on Sunday, January 19th. So if Trump wants to save it, hopefully he issues an executive order right away. I think it is very funny what a lot of TikTok users are doing. They're going over to this Chinese app, an app that's actually based in China, owned, the name is Chinese. I think the translation is like Red Note or something, Red Book. I downloaded it on my phone. I haven't made an account yet, but I think that's just such a hilarious way for people to respond to the banning of TikTok over these allegations that China gets access to our data through TikTok, is to just flock over to a app that is actually based in China. TikTok is based in the US. Its parent company is Chinese. And then this other app is just straight up Chinese. And I was scrolling through it. I like the look of the content. It all seemed very positive. And I love China. I think China is a wonderful place full of wonderful people. So, a little connection between Chinese people and Americans is probably good. So it's just a funny way that people are responding to the ban, but hopefully the ban doesn't happen. But we'll see what happens once Trump comes in. It's funny because he led the original effort. He tried to ban TikTok back in 2020. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Go check out our Viewpoints, one from Kyle Anzalone, his little wrap-up here of the Biden administration. It's titled Joe Biden's Legacy, Waging Proxy Wars, Spreading Terrorism, and Killing Diplomacy. It's a good summary. One from Reiho Takushi, Steady Progress Toward a War Against China. One from Ramsey Baroud, Israel Destroyed Gaza for Generations to Come and the World Stayed Silent. One from George Beebe, Trump May Get Russia and Ukraine to the Table, Then What? And our spotlight is from John Weeks, The Houthis are challenging Washington's zones of imperial domination. So please go check all that out. You could always support this show by liking, subscribing, commenting. Tell your friends about antiwar.com. Follow us on social media, Instagram, X, TikTok while it's still there. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.